Let's test this and see if it is actually working. So the function that we need to run is main, and you can see here that I don't have anything. So let's run it, and voila. So let's go and check. You can see here the data. So short and sweet, how you can connect TikTok ads to a Google Sheet. So the idea here is that we are going to pull all the ads and the information from those ads to a Google Sheet so you can do some reporting or like automate things. So I have this flowchart here to give you like a quick walkthrough of what we're going to do today. So basically we have this config, and here we're gonna set the variables that we need, right? So this is gonna be in app script as always. So we're gonna set up some variables here in the config, and then we will have a function that is gonna be like a main, and basically it's gonna orchestrate everything, right? So you can see that basically the idea here is that we will have just four functions. Two of them are gonna do the heavy lifting, meaning they're gonna pull the ads and the information. The other one is gonna be a helper that is gonna help us to like pull the data. And then here we have just one extra that is gonna be also a helper and is gonna write the data to a spreadsheet. Let's go to a report. So here we are in the report in Google Ads Manager, as you can see here. Maybe this is too small. Let me make it bigger. And this is the data that we're going to pull to a spreadsheet. So you can see that I created 3 ads. I let them run for a day just to get some numbers. So you can see we have some data here. And the idea is to pull this data to a spreadsheet using the API. All right, so we are here in the spreadsheet. And as you can see, I don't have anything. So the idea is that I will do everything from scratch. So you can see, you go here to extensions and then you go to app script. And here in app script, we can start writing the code. So as I mentioned before, the first thing that we need is we need to set up config with the variables that we need, right? So let's do that. So this is the config. As you can see here, I already have some data. So basically this base URL and this can be hard coded, right? So the base URL is just the endpoint that we're gonna use. Uh, this is the version, the current version that works. So that's why I'm using this one. But if you're watching this video later on, maybe there's a new one. So you just update this part here. And then we have here the default start and default end. And this is for the dates, right? Like the date ranges that you want to pull the data from. And then we have here the add sheet. So this is just the name of the sheet that I want to set up, when I run the code. And then these are the most like the part that is going to take a bit longer to set up, right? So we need this data, the app ID, the app secret, the access token, and the default advertiser ID. So so let's start with the app ID, right? So how to get this app ID and app secret, right? So we need to set up the app ID in TikTok. So I'm gonna put in the description the URL where you need to go, but is this one here. So is this one here, as you can see, is business/api.tiktok.com, then portal, then apps. That's the URL you will see in the description. And here you need to create an app, right? So I created this one for this test, but you gotta do like, if we were to test this one, you just gotta give it a name, description, the advertising your URL. You can have whatever URL you want. The idea with this URL is that when you're doing the authentication, it's gonna redirect you to that URL, right? So I typically use my website, which is automation.com.growth, automationforgrowth.com, this one here. So I just put that here. You can use your own website for that, right? It needs to be an actual website, cannot be like a local host or something like that, because it needs to be live. Or you could use localhost in case you don't have a website, but you need to use ngrok, right? In case you can use this one here. just research how to use it, and it gives you like a you can connect your local host with a website that they provide, so you can do these authentications with the URL. That's easier. Otherwise, if you have a website, you just use that website. And then here you can select the scopes, right? Of what you want to do with the API. In this case, we just need to pull. I just want to pull the data. So I'm setting up this one, Ads Manager, and I just select everything. But in case you want, more things, you can see all of it here. And then you click and submit. It's gonna take. They will review that, right? TikTok will review this app, and they will give you feedback in case that you need to change something. Maybe like the description. When I did it, the description wasn't long enough, so they asked me to provide a longer description, right? But other than that, I got approved like in 2 days, and then that's it. This is the app that I got, right? It was just a test app, and here in the test app, you can see that I upload a logo. This is the app ID, the one that we need for this part, right? The app secret. This is the secret, and this is the advertiser authorization URL. So this is what we need to get the token, so we can make calls to API, right? And that's it. That's pretty much the rest. You can just leave it as is. So okay, so you get the app ID, right? You get it here, and you paste it, and then you get the secret, right? Where you gotta like send confirmation to your email that you can do it. So let me do it. Okay, so this is my secret here, and then we need the access token, right? To get the access token, actually, it's pretty simple because they already created these URLs for you, so you don't need to do it yourselves. Usually, you have to do it yourself, right? But like in this case, we already have it, so you just need to copy that, and then you just paste it in a browser, right? And it will prompt you to give access to the scopes that you selected. In this case, I select everything because I was just testing, but you will have the scopes that you selected here when you were creating the app, and then you just confirm, right? And then it's gonna redirect you to a URL that you put when you created the app, right? As I mentioned, I created with my own website. However, look at the URL here. You can see that we have the code. They gave us a code, right? So that code, we need that to get the token, to get the access token, so we can make calls, right? So don't close this. We can have it here on hold while explaining something else. So to get the token, we need to we need to make a call to an endpoint, and then do some stuff. However, I coded a function that is going to do this for us quickly. You could use Postman or something if you want to do it, but if you don't want to do it, you can use my code. I'm gonna just put it here. We can doesn't matter because we'll just use it once to get the token, and it's this one here. You can use this as well to get the refresh token. That's what we need. So you can see it. We need the APD. So you can just copy the same thing that we have here, and then the app secret, same thing that we have here, right? This is one here, and then the auth code. So this is the code that I mentioned is here in the website, right? So you copy this one. For example, you can take this one that is after code, this one here. You can see both are the same, but I usually just take this one. So you copy that, and then you just paste it here, right? And then that's it, You just run this function and it's gonna return the token. For example, if you save this and then you run it, of course, the first time that you run this, it's gonna ask you, so you can run access. You click yes, then continue, and voila, this is the token, and this is the long-lasted token. If you wanna know more about how I did this is the documentation. I will put it also in the description. But basically, here they're explaining how to obtain a long-term access token, right? So they give you like the step by step that you gotta do. However, as I mentioned, I just simplified this for you guys, so I already did it myself this function. So you just need to run it, and that's it. This is the token. So we have the token, and then this is the access token that we have here, right? That's it. Voila. We don't need this anymore, so we can delete it. But I will put it in the code, the description, so you can also use it. Okay, so now that we have the access token, the last part that we're missing is how to get this default advertising ID, right? This one is simple. You go to Business Manager here, where you manage everything, and then you can go here to Accounts, and pretty much this is the one that we need, right? So this is, depending on the account that you wanna pull the data from. In this case, I only have one, so this is the only one that I have. But in case you're managing more accounts, well, you need to select which one you want, right? In this case, you just copy that ID and you put it here, and voila, this is pretty much the only thing that we need to make a call to an API, right, and get the ads data. So now, as I mentioned before, going back to our flowchart here, we need to build this function, right? We need to write this function, the main, that is gonna orchestrate everything, and then we need to have three more for the fetching and one more to write to the sheet, right? So let's start with main. Okay, so this is main, and as you can see, I added comments as always, so you can see what each function is doing, and also added some steps within the function. So the first step here, we are setting the variables that we need, so we're setting the token, the advertising ID, this one here, right? What are the dates that we need? And this is just like some checks just to make sure that we have actually a token and we have actually an ID, right? So the code doesn't break. And then once we have that, we will pull the data, well, right? We will fetch the data. Okay, so you can see that we're making two calls here, and and you could ask, why are we making two calls if we're only fetching ads, right? It's not like we're fetching ads and campaigns, or like ad sets and campaigns. We're only fetching ads. So why do we need two calls? The first one is because we need to make, like, depending on the data that you want to pull from the ads, you could use either, right? So in this case, we need to fetch the name and the ID of the ad. So that's why we need this one. And then we need to pull the metrics for the ads. So that's why we need another one to pull the metrics. So you will see when we get into the function of each. But that's pretty much how it works. Like the first one is gonna pull the metadata of the ad, and the second one is gonna pull the actual metrics, right? So if we go to a report here in TikTok, so here in the report, the first call is gonna pull the name and the ID, this one, and then the second call is gonna pull the cost, CPC, CPM, impressions, right? That's how it works, how the API works for the ads. That's why we need two metrics here, right? And then here, the next step, we are from the responses of each, we're just mapping everything, so it looks good. And then once we have like our variable with everything mapped, we pass that to this function, right? TikTok ad sheet, which pretty much is this one here, right? So we pass that, and it's gonna write that to a sheet, right? So you can see that we have here like a reverse. That's because the data was coming backwards. So I set it up to be written in order. So you can see that it's gonna look, same as here, at one, at two, and three, right? And then that's it, then it just returns a count. This is just for like debugging, but if you don't need it, you can just remove that. That doesn't really matter. These are the important part, right? And now we can go ahead and start building this fetching, right? So let's start actually with the helper, so you can understand why we need a helper here. Okay, so this is the helper that we need. And basically you can see that is just a plain call, right? We're not making anything fancy here. It's just making an HTTP request, a get, right? And we're passing the access token, and then that's the only thing that this function is doing. But it's gonna be a helper because we need to use it in both functions, right? All right, so we have already the fetcher, this one here. So now we need to build these two functions, right? As I mentioned before, we need to get the ads information. The first one is gonna get the metadata of the ad, basically the name, ID, right? And then the second one is gonna get the metrics themselves, right? Like CPC and this data, right? Like the CPM, CPC, impressions, and so on. So let's do that, right? So this is the function to get the first part, the entities, the metadata. As you can see here, it's a simple call to this endpoint at get, as you can see here. And then we're passing the advertising ID that we have here, right? And then you can see here that we're doing like a loop. So do this, all of this, while this is true, meaning the page is bigger than total. So basically what it's doing here is something called pagination. So for the ones who are not familiar how APIs work, is that usually APIs don't give you everything at once, all the data at once, right? It's gonna give you a page. You can think of it like a book. So it will show you the first page, and then if you need more data, you request the second page, and so on and so forth. So depending on the API, the first page will contain certain amount of items. So some APIs let you request a bunch of data. Some of them just a few, and you need to make more calls. So independent on the API. So for example, this API lets you pull a lot of data. As you can see here, I'm pulling in the first page, like the page size is 1,000. So you can see that is pretty long, pretty large. So the first call is basically that, right? So we're passing the base URL that we set up here in the config, and then we're passing the endpoint with the advertising ID, the page size, and then the page that we need, right? So first page, second page, and so on. And then here we're making a mapping pretty much, from the response from the data that we're getting. You can see here that we're using the fetcher, the helper that we just had, right? That we just created, we just built. And it's pretty much doing a loop, right? And mapping everything. And once everything is done, you can see here that we set up a variable to be aggregating all the data. So once that's finished, we return that, right? And with this function, we have this part here, the add list, and then we need to get the metrics. It's gonna be similar. So this is the function for metrics. Okay, so this is the second function to get the metrics. And as you can see, the logic is pretty similar. The only thing that changes is that the mapping is a bit longer because we are pulling more data. But basically, the idea with these two functions is that in one, I'm pulling all the metadata, right? And in the second one, I'm pulling all the data for the ads. And at the end, I'm going to map both. So you can think of it like when we get to this part, to write to a sheet, right? You're gonna have two arrays, one with the metadata of the ad, and the other one with the metrics, and we wanna map everything, and then we write that to a sheet. That's pretty much the logic, right? So here we're pulling the second part of the data, which is all the metrics for all the ads, right? So you can see here that we're making a call this endpoint report integrator get changes. This one here was only at get, and here we're passing the type of report that we want, right? It's just a basic report, and we pull the metrics. And here you can see the same logic of the pagination, right? Give me 1,000. The size of the page is gonna be 1,000, and then we start on page one, and then it's gonna do the loop, right? So you can see here that it's doing a do while, right? Just keeps looping until it finishes. In this case, I only need one call because I only have 3 ads, as you can see here. But if you were to have like more than 1,000 ads of more than 1,000 items in the API, well, you will just paginate until it finishes. And then here you can see that it's aggregating and computing the rates, right? So pretty much here is just returning the data and mapping everything, and then it sends that back, right? It returns that. That's pretty much what's happening. And then the last one that we need, this is one sheet output, right? Okay, so this is the last function that I mentioned that we need, right to a sheet, right? Here you can see that it receives rows. So if we go to main, you can see that the second part was fetching, right? So we fetch the first part and then we fetch the second part of the ads data. And then here we're doing like a join. So this is the join that I mentioned. First we're pulling the first array with the metadata, then we're pulling the metrics of the ads, and then here we're doing the mapping, right? And then when that's done, we send that to this function, right? To sheet, right? And again, the data comes backwards. So that's why I'm doing a reverse here. So it's gonna write in the in order. So it's gonna look like this, right? First ad, second ad, third ad. Yeah, so that's pretty much what it's doing here. So first we're preparing the sheet, right? So it's just making sure that the sheet actually exists. If it doesn't exist, it creates the sheet. If the sheet exists, it clears the sheet and then writes the headers. So this is the headers that we need just to make it look same as this, right? And then here just mapping everything to a sheet, right? And that's it, here we write. That's pretty much how you can connect to TikTok. So let's test this and see if it's actually working. So the function that we need to run is main, and you can see here that I don't have anything. So let's run it. So the first time that you run this, pop this, so you need grant access. So you just do this, you allow the access, and voila. So let's go and check. You can see here the data. So if we were to compare with what we had in the report, so this is the data, right? You can see we have at 123 and 123. These are the names, and then this is the campaign name. The status is enabled. You can see that I have this enabled. Of course, this is paused because I paused the campaign, but you can see that the ad is actually there. And then we could test, for example, the cost, right? So you can see that for the first ad, we have 845, then 1450, and then 26K. And same for the other metrics, right? So yeah, that's pretty much how this works. Just to give you a walkthrough of what you can edit in case you want to play with this. Well, you don't need to change anything in the config. Once you have this set up, you don't need to change anything. The only thing that you will need to change is in case you are adding more things like more metrics, you need to modify this mapping here. And you will need to modify this mapping as well when you're writing to a sheet, right? And also, it depends, like if you're pulling more data here for the metadata, you need to modify this one. And in case you want to pull or do more things with data here in the metrics part, you also need to modify this function. But here I just made it simple for you guys so you can see that it's pretty much pulling the most important data that usually you need. But yeah, that's pretty much how this works. This API works. Okay, guys, so that's pretty much it for the video. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comments. I will reply to them as soon as I can.